Hello, my name is Mark Taylor, and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast, the place for creative and inspiring learning from around the world. Listen to teachers, parents, and mentors share how they are supporting children to live their best, authentic life and are proving to be a guiding light to us all.
Hi, Rella. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Education on Fire podcast. I love what you're doing in terms of the books that you're creating, and I love the passion that comes through with that, and the fact that you're sort of branching into these new mediums of the podcasting into YouTube and things as well. So, yeah, thanks so much. I'm really going to look forward to chatting to you about all this.
Thanks for having me, Mark. This is amazing.
So, for those people who haven't come across Rella B Books before, give us that sort of elevator pitch, as it were, in terms of who's it aimed for specifically, and what was sort of the driving force behind it.
Right. So, my content and my books are geared towards preschoolers to early education, probably grades K through 2. And it just has to do with a lot of diversity, a lot of movement, literacy promotion. A lot of kids I see nowadays are very into tablets. They're not so much into books. And I really want to make reading cool again.
Yeah, I love that. And what's your background within it? Was sort of education your passion? Was it kids that your passion?
So I've always loved kids, and I really thought that, I was like, I was made to be a stay-at-home mama. I thought that since I was very, very young. And then I went into education. I started teaching computer literacy for K through 6, and I did that for a year. And then I started working in the technology department because I really, really loved computers. And I felt like it was really important for kids to learn how to use technology early on because it was always going to be a part of their life.
Mm.
And so after I did that, for 3 years total, I was like, "You know what? I really just wanna travel and see the world, and I just kinda wanna, like, live my life." So I became a flight attendant, and while I was flying, I just had too much time to sit. So I started writing children's books, and now I am finally releasing them to the world 7 years later.
So you say that so casually in terms of, I just had loads of time and I just wrote a children's book. I'm sure there are many of us who might have thought of, I'm just going to write a book of any description, and no, that doesn't just happen. So take us a little bit into that process.
Of course. So it definitely didn't happen like that. But on long haul flights, when I'm flying for 6 or 7 hours, there is a lot of downtime. So during that time, I would have a lot of conversations with passengers or with other flight attendants. And then I would think, you know what? I haven't read a children's book about that. Maybe it would be cool to write about it. I would do a lot of journaling, planning, budgeting as well during this time. But after 5 years of writing these books and never backing them up, I actually had a company update on the work iPad I was writing all of these things on, and they all got wiped out.
Oh,
So after that, I was like, okay, well, this is the fire that I needed. Let's go ahead and rewrite some books, and then let's actually back them up, publish them, get them out there. So that really was the motivation that I needed to go ahead and get to the next step. But I didn't just stop there. I was like, well, how am I going to market it? Like, let's make a YouTube channel that promotes reading and literacy and movement, and let's do a podcast, and let's do this and that. And so now it's just becoming a little bit of a small rock that's turning into a big boulder going down the hill.
and that makes sense, because if your passion is kind of getting this information out into the world and to sort of create that environment for children, then I guess each of these elements have their own sort of unique focus, but they sort of, that same passion sort of comes through.
Yes, for sure. The videos are great for kiddos that can't necessarily read yet and need to see like a lot of emotion. The podcast is a little bit better for older kids that can kind of visualize things and they can just listen to an audiobook. And then, I get a lot of support and collaboration from different authors and stuff through social media. So it's been really nice being on all these different platforms.
And I see from your website that, you've kind of got every sort of box ticked in terms of, you've got merchandise on there for sale, and lots of areas that you're kind of sort of trying to sort of support people with. That is the brand, it's the kind of the world you want them to inhabit. How did you sort of go into that, as well as just those other things that you said that you created in terms of the podcast and the books and the YouTube?
Right. So I feel like if I said it in like street terms, I would just say I have no chill. And I just kind of kept going. I was like, well, I could do this and I could do this. And now I do think that it's not necessarily backfiring, but it is a lot to keep up with.
Mhm.
So I had a lot of things that I really wanted to keep doing and be able to provide a lot of value. I feel like I have been able to do that, but now I put all those things out there, but they weren't optimized. So now I'm in the point where I'm like, okay, I have to really focus on my podcast and getting better sound quality, or, marketing it better. And then I need to refocus on maybe the outline of my YouTube. So I'm focusing on each piece and part of it now and making them better. So the website does have a lot of things on there, and that actually needs to be redone too, because there's just so much that can be better.
I think it's all a journey, isn't it? I mean, my podcast here started in 2016, and even now I look at things that I created a long time ago, thinking that needs to be updated. I mean, I'm in the process of reevaluating now in terms of, because we've now got the video element on it as well as the live streaming. The fact that so much of my audience is obviously on the audio side because that's where we started, and it's kind of like I say, wanting to grow, wanting to support as many people as you can, but there's only so many hours in the day, and also you want to keep the people that are really loving what you're doing as part of your family, as it were, while also expanding out to get new people and to give them new ways of interacting, which is the reason I love the streaming side of it, because people could react at the same time as having these conversations. But you're right, it's interesting how the actual sort of fundamentals of what you need day in, day out suddenly become not the barriers necessarily, but the thing that you need to make sure they're really sort of strong and all those foundations are in place, because then it gives you the freedom to be creative as well as, like I say, just sort of servicing all those elements.
Definitely, because doing those day-to-day things can get really, really cumbersome really fast.
Yeah. And one of the things which sort of comes really sort of shining through with all these things is the fact that it's not just topics of things you think you want to cover, it's sort of real values and understanding of life. So why is that important to you, and how have you sort of tried to sort of implement that through your stories?
So, one of the big things for me is trying to create the content that I want my daughter to be able to consume. So, I've done a lot of research on different shows that she's watched, of different shows from different generations, and picked out things that I really liked and I thought was valuable about it. And then for my books, those come from pretty deep conversations that I had with people on planes. And so, like, one of my books is about financial literacy, just very basic fundamentals about money and what you can do with it. And the other one is about shapes that are all different colors, sizes, and they have, different lives. But it's the root of it is that you can't compare your life to someone else's, like apples to apples. So you should always be grateful for what you have. Um, I just think those are really important lessons from 0 to 100. Like,
Yeah.
everybody can always be reminded of those things. And financial literacy is something that needs to be introduced as soon as kids are basically able to grasp the fact that you're trading time for money and money for goods. Because, I had a small, I wouldn't say like a struggle, but I did have to have a very different mindset when it comes to money just growing up, because I got a credit card at 18 and I was like, "All right, cool. Like, let's go do things with this credit card." And I feel like some people, get themselves in a little bit of trouble because they don't understand, like, even the power of interest and like how quickly things can get out of control.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things there that strike me. One is the kind of the real sort of factual idea of finance, and that sort of financial literacy idea. And like you said, that idea that, I'm going to work and earning this money, or I've set up this particular business model, in whatever form that has to be, obviously when you're talking to a child, but understanding that, this number of people come to visit my website, and from that, this number of people might buy the book, or however it kind of works. It doesn't look like I'm going to work today because I've just gone up to my studio to record a podcast, but actually this is part of what I do. It's not just a question of when I go out to a school and do some drum teaching, for example. They're all part of the fabric of my life, but they've all got a slightly different way of doing that. And I think just realizing that sometimes it's not about, I guess, sort of having, now we need to sit down and talk about money or talk about finance. It's that kind of, it's in the same way as you generally talk a little bit about food and you talk about what's around you. You do it at a level which is important for the age group, and the sort of the type of child you're chatting to as well, and the environment they're in. But like I say, it sort of grows with you, and rather than, "No, I'm now going to teach you how to count the numbers of steps up the stairs," you just count because you're going up the stairs, and it just becomes part and parcel of what you're doing.
Definitely.
So tell me a little bit about kind of your journey. You said you sort of traveled around the world. Why did you sort of, how sort of far and wide did you go in terms of, I know you said the conversations were important, but was the actual experiences themselves, what sort of impact did they have? And then in terms of where you're now living as well, having sort of settled down again.
Right. So, I traveled a lot as a child too. So I've always really loved traveling. I lived in Japan for 3 years and I unfortunately have not gotten to go back. But I like to go to Europe. So Germany, London. I've been to Greece, Spain. I haven't gotten to Africa yet, unfortunately, or South America. But I go to Mexico quite a good amount and the Caribbean as well. I love going to Europe because it's comfortable enough for me to go out on my own a little bit without being too adventurous. I feel like other places sometimes I need to go on a tour. So like I went to China and I went with a tour group because I was like, I don't know if I know enough about the culture, just how to like get around and communication too. So I really enjoyed those things because the cultural immersion of food and people and architecture, all of that stuff is just so beautiful.
Yeah, no, and like I say, that then becomes part and parcel of who you are, doesn't it? And then you want to sort of share that through your children, and like I say, whether your outlet happens to be as an author or whatever that happens to be. I think teachers have the same thing sometimes as well. It's like I'm in this class teaching this age group, or I'm teaching this particular subject, and then all of a sudden the children realise that you're a human being that's actually been to this country, or I'd sort of talk sometimes about some of the concerts that I've done. They're like, "Oh, I didn't quite realise you did that," and and it's sort of, you become a real person, and I guess that probably helps you as well from that author point of view too.
Yes, definitely. I get to learn a lot about like different people, and that's really important, especially when it comes to like writing perspectives. Because you can't write for everybody. And I try to be very, very considerate when I write things, but sometimes people are like, I didn't like that. And that's also okay because you don't have to be everything for everybody.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson, isn't it? It's a great thing to impart. So, in terms of going forward, a lot of what people want to do is to kind of have. I've got 2 books. I'm going to have 20 books. I'm going to have 40 books, and then, like you say, you end up in this world of so many things going on all the time. Have you sort of got a longer term plan of things to cover, or like you said, are you going to sort of focus down on 2 or 3 things, but in different areas that maybe will give you that attention?
Right. So I'm trying to optimize all of these areas so I can see which one is going to be like self-sustainable first, if that makes sense, where
Mm.
I can get to being so good at it, it's almost like second nature, and then I can focus on something else better. So, me selling my books, I feel like has been a little bit on the back burner to me creating content because creating content is going to get eyes on me, who I am, and then I can always promote my books and my content. Um, so I'm creating a lot of content and I'm trying to create a lot of different types. Right now, I do a lot of like read alongs and sing alongs. But I'm actually working on things where I talk to kids just about like real life things that people may not think to talk about to their kids. Like, this is the inside of a car where your mom and your dad sit. They have to steer the car, they have to press the gas to accelerate, and then they have to brake. They can't always look at you because they have to focus on all the things around them. So I'm trying to do a lot of stuff like that. And my daughter recently had a lockdown at her school, and it's been something that she talks about almost every day because it was very traumatic for her.
I can imagine, yeah.
Um, so I want to talk to kids about that too. Like, hey, do you know that this is a fire alarm? It makes really loud noises. And sometimes that happens, like for a mistake, but sometimes it could be an emergency. But we don't have to be afraid. We just have to be prepared. And this is what we do in that situation. So I'm trying to become a entertainment ecosystem for kids, but I do want to focus on read-alongs right now and promoting literacy, and then a little bit later, maybe at the end of the year, I'll be able to do segments on, like, safety.
And it really comes across. And I think that's really what I took away from the website as well, was that, like I say, that there are lots of things on there, but I think it's the essence of you that comes through in each of those areas, which is so fantastic. Whether it's the personality and the kind of the colourfulness of what you're trying to do and how you're sort of trying to sort of bring this to life. And I think, like I say, whether that's chatting to kids, whether it's the book and all those other outlets as well, I think that's really, really key. And I think we we connect with people, and I think understanding and those personalities coming through, and I think that's probably the element which is probably going to give, or is already giving you, that sense of real direction, because I can sort of hear it in your voice and sort of feel it in that, whether it's the read along, whether it's actually, this is the story I want to tell, this is what I want to be part of in your life now. That essence and that kind of central area of who you are is something you can't buy and you can't package in that way. So I think that's kind of the key thing, which is fascinating to hear, but also to sort of hear you demonstrating as well.
Thank you. It's definitely something that I want to use. I do want to do like Rella B lives and be able to talk to students about safety, diversity, financial things. So it's trying to not go helter skelter. It has to be released with a plan and a time and done properly. So it's been
Yeah.
really interesting.
Fantastic. And I'm always fascinated, especially with people who've obviously we've been to school, but then going into the education world and then sort of focusing on what your skill set is to then have a different sort of focus, whether it's outside of education as well, obviously, which you're now doing with all the things we've chatted about. But is there either an education experience that you remember or a teacher that you remember that kind of had an impact on you? And then also maybe talk a little bit about how maybe that's sort of given you some thoughts or some ideas about how you're now sort of showing up in that sort of learning space.
Yes. So I had a teacher that actually lived across the street from me, and her name was Miss Thomas, and she taught me for second grade and third grade, and she actually had a son that was in the same grades as me as well. So we got to play together. We did our homework together. If I had a question, I could go ring her doorbell. I feel like it's an experience that not a lot of kids get to have, but I was able to have that because my dad was in the military and we all lived on the military base. So she was definitely a teacher that I loved having. She was like a second mom, and that was like really nice.
Yeah, lovely. And is there a piece of advice you've been given or a piece of advice you might give your younger self now, sort of looking back?
I feel like they're two different things. I think the most impactful advice that I've gotten, actually, they could be the same thing. When I was younger, I had a teacher that told me that, again, you don't have to be everything for everybody, and you don't actually have to finish everything that you start. I was very, very into like, okay, I started this, like I have to finish it, even if it was like miserable and I really didn't want to do it. She was like, if something is not serving you anymore and it's causing you like pain or distress, you don't have to finish it. Like it is okay to get rid of something that is no longer serving you. And then recently I went to a conference for authors, and a publishing company said that it's really important that you hire slowly and fire fast. And that sounded really, really brutal to me. But now, like being in this space and having like some people that are helping me out, I realize that it's really valuable information. Like you need to vet people, make sure that they can actually do what you're hiring them for. And then if they can't make the cut, then you need to get rid of them, after you try to retrain them. But you have to find the people that are willing to like run with you. Otherwise, that could hinder you.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that idea of making sure that actually not only are you sort of getting to know people slowly in from that sense, and that, like I say, whether that's actually an employee or whether it's actually the sort of the support team that's around you and how that sort of comes about. I think that's really, really valuable. And I think also that understanding really of not having to finish everything. I mean, that's such an important thing. And I think I certainly have that. Well, I've started it, so I'm going to finish it. Or I thought it was a good idea. So if it's not a good idea now, why is that? Have I failed before I've even started, let alone completed it? And of course, what most people don't understand, sort of from a personal point of view, is that the majority of people don't know what you're doing because you're in your head all the time. You know what you're thinking about, you know what you're creating, you know the amount of effort you've put into something. But the majority of people, unless they're really following you really, really closely, won't even necessarily know how far you've got with a project or something that you thought you were doing, or something was part of your kind of general master plan that you decided to sort of swivel for. And I think
Right.
sometimes you just have to just do that. And I think having that permission of kind of, this really isn't serving me now, whether it's a content focused thing, whether it's a time related thing, or whatever it happens to be. I think so many people it'll certainly make them think, and as it did me when I heard it, because I thought, yeah, I can really relate to that.
Yes, I think that was profound, like her saying that. Because even like food, when I was younger, it was like you have to finish what you put on your plate. So it's like, oh, gotta be careful.
Yeah, exactly. I still have that now when we're having a family meal. It's like, well, partly because I like food as well, because I want to finish it. But there is that also that thought, which is probably something I'm sure you chat to kids about. That kind of, but are you actually full? Or are you hungry? What are you eating and why are you eating it? And certainly as you get older, that kind of, why are you eating it now? And I know certainly this is a slight tangent, but sort of that kind of what you expect people to do, certainly from a kid's standpoint, it's that kind of where you must have, your fruit and veg, and you must do this, and it must look like that, and every meal should look like this. And it was only when someone said to us, it was that kind of, but what do they eat over a week? And then we thought, over the course of a week, our children were eating a really well-balanced diet. They weren't necessarily having all of that on their plate every meal, but over the course of that amount of time, and they were saying, well, if you think about them as they're growing, their digestion, what it is that they need, they kind of know that already, and there's a certain amount of that takes care of itself. And you just have to stand back for long enough to think, yeah, actually, no, this is all working. And actually having a fight every meal about eating the last pea or broccoli or something like that, if they're having it on another day, isn't worth it, because actually they're getting what they need over that amount of time as well. But yeah, always something I remembered. And even now, as the kids have got older a little bit, just, let's take a step back enough to sort of see what the whole picture looks like rather than just the here and now.
Right. That's so important.
And is there a resource that you'd like to share? And this can be anything that you love or has had an impact from a video, a song, film, podcast, book, but something that you remember you'd like to share.
Just something that's been very impactful in my life.
Yeah.
Um, I just think this is really funny. If it's okay, if I share a quote.
Of course.
I am always like soliciting my family to help me with random projects. And recently I had my brother and my mom come and try to help me move this very large L-shaped desk that I'm actually sitting at right now. And we had to figure out how to get it from inside of a building into a truck, and we didn't have like a dolly or anything. We didn't have any help. And they were starting to get really, really frustrated with me. Because they're like, well, I don't even know like why we help you. Like you always have us on these like adventures, and they're like, I don't know why we do this with you every time. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. And so I went across the street, I found these movers, and I asked them to help me put it in the truck, and they were able to get it in the truck. And I was basically not lifting any fingers, but my mom and my brother, the movers were getting everything together. And then I got in the car, and my mom was like, you know what? Um, she was like, I'm not helping you anymore. I was like, why? I was like, we did a great job. This was great. And she just looked at me because like I really didn't do anything but like open a door. And she was like, you know what? She's like, God loves babies and fools. She's like, which one are you? I was like, I'll just never forget that. It was just very, very funny.
But very impactful, like I say, and whatever those lessons are, or however they come across, if they hit you between the eyes, which is whether they're meant to do that intentionally or not intentionally, it served its purpose in whatever way, hasn't it? So,
Right.
absolutely love it. Now, the acronym FIRE is really important to us here at Education on Fire, and by that we mean feedback, inspiration, resilience, and empowerment. What is it that strikes you when you hear these words?
So in a lot of ways, I see independence, and I also see like collaboration. When it comes to feedback, it's so important to be able to have feedback from people that are around you, and then that allows you to be more productive, and then you can be resilient in your efforts, and you can feel empowered, especially after getting really good feedback that may improve whatever you're doing. So I definitely think that they all go together as far as like a cyclical motion, as far as like you should always be going through all of those things all of the time.
Yeah, I think it's really key, isn't it, sometimes to sort of see how they all interact. And I think for me, certainly feedback is something which it feels like it can be really difficult because it feels like someone's getting at you, which of course they're not, because especially if you ask for feedback or you're in that position, people are trying to do it in a way that's going to be supportive, and they're going to give you information, it's going to help you get better. And I think the sort of the cyclical part of that is the fact that, how do I take the next bit of feedback and actually don't take that on board in the same way. That's just what struck me when you were mentioning that, because I'd still sometimes have that kind of, oh, is that what they meant, or should it be like this, or am I doing something wrong? And just a little bit like each time, and another bit of the onion disappears, and you have a little bit more faith in what you're doing, and know that it's being given in the best possible way, and taking that through. And it always sort of feeds back then for me into that sort of resilience of, no, I'm getting better at this. I can understand how it's going, and with that then comes the inspiration and the empowerment, or whatever, however it happens to sort of follow through. Yeah, so I really like that sort of seeing it all in the round and how everything kind of works together. Such an important factor. So, well, I really appreciate you chatting to me today. It's been fascinating sort of looking into your world and what it is that you've been doing. So just before you go, do tell everyone where can they go and find out more about you in terms of your books and the podcast and the YouTube, and we'll make sure we have all those things on the show notes as well.
Yes, so you can go to rellabooks.com, and that's RELLABOOKS.com, or you can type in Reading with Rella B onto Google or YouTube, and you can find my videos, my podcasts, my merch, my books. They're also able to be found on Amazon if you just type in Rella B Books as well. I can ship like pretty much everywhere, I think, except for maybe Asia right now. But yeah, you can find me at Rella B Books everywhere, even on social media platforms.
Fantastic. So I do urge everyone, go and enter the world of Rella B Books and find out more about it, but that personality and that way of sort of supporting you and your children to be part of this world that you've created. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it today.
Thank you, Mark. This was so great.
I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and thank you so much for being part of the Education on Fire community. Links and details of today's podcast are in the description, and if you would like to support the show with a small donation, that's a wonderful way to help me bring you more creative and inspiring learning. Please visit educationonfire.com/support, and remember, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.